One.
Good evening, everyone. This is Indrajit Gupta. I'm a co-founder at Founding Fuel. A very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us this evening for the Masterclass on Reimagining Work in the Post-Pandemic World. We have exciting fare lined up this evening with two, I think, people who are really going to be very fine minds, both of them. Professor Tsedal Neeley and Bhargav Dasgupta. I'll introduce them in just a minute. Hi, Tsedal.
Hi.
How are you?
It's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Hi, Bhargav. You're joining from us from Bombay, of course.
Yeah. Hi, Aji. Hi, Tsedal. Hi, Kavi. Thank you for having me. Wonderful to be here.
Pleasure. So there are lots of people who kind of joining us live on LinkedIn as well as Facebook and YouTube this evening. There are many people who actually did call in and say that they would have loved to be part of this conversation, but given all that's happening in across the country and in the city, they'd probably wait for the recording and the summary that we'll send them later this evening or tomorrow morning. I do, want to reach out to all the people who are kind of going through these challenging times and are certainly we'd like you to stay safe and stay well. But this was a conversation that was planned many weeks ago, and it's an important conversation given how the pandemic in some ways has completely upended our lives and our work. So today we're examining what it did to the world of work and the future of work and what that means. So it'll be nice if those of you who are joining could use the chat box to tell us and say a big hi to our panelists. Introduce yourself maybe and tell us where you're joining us from. Just a short introduction, your name and perhaps where you're joining us from. So it'll give us a good sense of the audience today. So without much ado, I'll kind of spend a little bit of time with Tsedal and with Bhargav before we get started. And I'll also like to kind of introduce my colleague and co-founder, Charles ICICI, who's anchoring the session on LinkedIn Live, and my colleague and moderator today, who's going to jointly anchor it, Kavi Arasu. So you'll see him shortly. So Tsedal, wanted to start with you first. I know your work on remote work and your research has spanned almost 20 years, right? But I'm not sure the audience really knows that you have an India connection as well to that research. What is that about?
First of all, let me just say thank you again for having me. It's an honor to be with you, to be with everyone. I also want to acknowledge that my heart is broken and it pains me to see how this global pandemic is affecting my friends in India, everyone in India. So I am prayerful and I'm hoping that things will turn around. We've all suffered from the pandemic. I've lost an uncle, a young uncle, actually, the youngest one in January. So I just want to acknowledge where we are. And yes, in fact, this pandemic has upended our work structures, but it's a topic, the idea of virtual work, remote work, and global work is one that I started to look at some 20 years ago. And in particular, I spent a lot of time in India looking at globally distributed workers and team members with the company named SAP. I'm sure many of us are very familiar with them and what they do, and was able to be kind of an observer, participant observer, with several teams in India who are collaborating with teammates in Germany. So I spent time in India, in Bangalore, in Chennai, and then headed to Waldorf, Germany, where I spent time with the German team members and was able to firsthand see the worlds that are very different and how we work very differently. But India and the Indian culture has been a huge part of my world for decades, actually.
Terrific, Tsedal. So I have a follow-up question. I know we'll spend a lot of time on the world of work and business organizations, but you were at the epicenter of it in March last year when the Harvard Business School and the university had to also transition and make a huge transition. What role did you play there, and what did that take?
Actually, in 5 days, Harvard University, not just the business school, but the entire university, migrated some 20,000 learners, students, professors to remote teaching very suddenly. And my colleagues, like Karim Lahani, who you may be familiar with, I think he's done a masterclass at some point, my good friend and colleague, and his Harvard Business Analytics group had spent a couple of years with remote and online learning using Zoom nonetheless, and had a lot of experience. So they actually were the ones who helped migrate the institution with task forces, etc. My own role in my work has actually been much more external facing, to try to support institutions and organizations and do the work that every professor dreams of, which is your work kind of meets the moment and you try to put out work that will actually significantly help people. And my work that has sat at the intersection of work and technology for a couple of decades actually became salient and important. So started to publish, started to talk a lot, started to do a lot of media work to try to provide some best practices to the world.
Terrific. So I can see that there's so many people who've kind of shared messages of lovely to see so many friends, and old and new, who joined us today. Yogesh Bhatt, Atul Takle, Rakesh Jaitley, Dr. Anil Khandelwal, who used to be the chairman of the Bank of Baroda. Lovely to see all of you. Bharat Gera, Sudha Rao, Bindu Kulkarni. Terrific. Alka as well from Delhi, Srinivasan. So I'll come to you, Bhargav. You too have a HBS connection, actually, we discovered just the other day. Tell us a little about that. When did that happen? And you've had a long career at ICICI, the group, since what, 92, Bhargav?
Yeah, 92. First, let me also add to my word of prayers for all of us in India. And, for all the people here in this room, I hope everyone in your family is staying safe. Take care. And I just hope that we cross this pandemic peak very soon. So coming back to your question, IG, first, again, thank you for having me. It's honestly a big honor to be on to do a masterclass with Tsedal. I'm looking forward to learning a lot rather than anything else. So thank you again for having me. In terms of the Harvard connection is really very, is reflected glory in a sense, because this was a case study that Harvard did about some work that we had done in ICICI Bank. Those were, when I was in ICICI Bank, and that is the connection. Nothing more than that. But it was a fascinating experience going and taking a class, talking about the case study with the MBA class. Right. If I remember correctly, it was probably in 2004 or 5.
This was around your stint when you were heading international banking, right?
That is correct. It was a case study on international banking.
Okay. I just wanted to draw from that experience when you were because you would have gotten exposure to some issues of global culture as well as part of that stint. Tell us a little about what you learned during that period.
So actually, lots. One, one of the models that we are trying to build for building, banks in some of the developed countries. There are two elements of the strategy, if you can call it that. One was diaspora, right? Follow the customer, and the second one was a experiment, which was use technology and the cost arbitrage model, that is the BPO model of India, to build a business where entire cost structure was kept in India. Uh, Service, operations, technology, everything was kept in India, but the customer-facing teams were in some of these countries. So we had launched a bank in Canada using that model. But I think the bigger learning was personally was to really see the dynamics of a cross-cultural organization. We were obviously a very Indian entity till that time, and when we started, recruiting teams, we saw the intercultural, challenges of two teams working together, coming from two different cultures, two different mindsets. Honestly speaking, till you got into it, you really didn't. You knew about it theoretically, but you really didn't know, till you hit the ground running. What would be the implications? So those were some of the very interesting learnings, and handling some of those issues was very fascinating.
Sure, I'm sure we'll pick up the threads with both Tsedal and you on that issue around global and local culture. But I wanted to kind of bring in Kavi to essentially help us understand why this conversation is important. Kavi, all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ajay. Fantastic to connect both Tsedal and Bhargav. This is a very important connection and conversation at this point in time. I have a feeling, I have some data with me, and I have some very hard evidence that's there on the field for all of us to see. And those point to some very specific elements. These are some things for all of us to consider. Point number one, we are going to get back to work at some point, back to our offices rather, at some point in distributed ways. It's not going to be, it's most unlikely that we're going to land up in office together as one large unit. It's going to be in waves that we will get back to work. If that's going to be the case, then working hybrid, as in some of us in office, some of us outside office, not in office, is going to be the norm. So that's going to be a reality, a hard reality that all of us are going to face. So that's one. Two, of course, the pandemic has upended a lot of our established modes of thinking about work, about workplaces, about where and how, and all of that. All of this needs practical consideration. And from my work and from my work with all of the colleagues on this call, it's but obvious that some of us are into it. Some of us are waiting to see what's going to happen with those who are in it. And some of us are looking forward to put to practice what's on the minds of others. And one of us amongst here has done some research on it. So I think this conversation is about building the bridges between the worlds of practice and research, between the worlds of what was happening in 2018, 19, and then to the future. So we have planned this as a broad conversation between the worlds of practice and theory, between the past, present, and future. So we'll have three segments in this conversation. One is about the pandemic in itself and how that has upended most of our work. Number two is about what's aiding and what's coming in the way. And number three, the third section, is going to be broadly about what's the future looking like and how must we prepare for the future, both as individuals and as organizations. So that's how the whole structure of this conversation is spanned. So, IG, would you just want to come in and talk a little bit about how we'll take this forward now?
Yes. Also, I just wanted to quick message for all those who are joining us on LinkedIn Live, and Facebook and YouTube. Please we like to keep this interactive. So do keep asking, sharing your comments, your questions, and we'll try and pick up a few and keep this conversational, like Kavi was saying, because that's the best way to learn, we believe. So thanks, Kavi, for that backdrop. I think it sets the stage. We'll dive into that bit on the pandemic as a game changer. And Tsedal, the first thing I'd come to you. You spent 20 years, as you said, researching remote work. And then the pandemic hit in some ways.
Yeah.
And you were in the middle of writing your book, which has just come out in the end of March, right? So how did that change things for you, both in terms of your understanding from the past and what the pandemic brought to the table?
Yes, that's a really great question, because it kind of puts together what we have known for a very long time and some of the new challenges that we're seeing today because of the sheer scale and magnitude of the amount of people who are involved in some kind of a remote collaboration. So for years, 20 years ago, I was convinced that technology was going to change work, and more and more people would be collaborating from a distance. And the numbers are typically pre-pandemic. They were about 25 to 30% of members of organizations had reason to collaborate outside of their work. And so once this pandemic hit, it actually really dramatically increased the scale and the number of people who are now using digital tools to interact with one another. And what that did is, even to people who had been veterans of remote work or distributed work suddenly saw their own routines change because others now had joined, and the demands, the communication demands, the interaction demands, the documentation demands, and figuring out how do we develop, maintain enduring personal connection became pressing questions. How do we develop, maintain enduring trust becomes a question. And for leaders, suddenly they had to figure out how to ensure that productivity stayed the same, despite the fact that they could not see what people were doing. So it led to a lot of insecurity. And of course, with the pandemic, for many of us, at least in the US, we had to deal with remote school children teaching. My husband and I have two young sons, ages 8 and 10, and we're both professors. He's an engineering professor, and I'm a business school professor. And we have both concluded that being a professor is actually a liability to help children with like teaching. We're like, fired. Our children have fired us. We're terrible. But we had to worry about that as well. So pressures from families and home and space to work and technology infrastructures that may or may not be terrific in our homes all became a factor, and people had to grapple with those newly. So those are some of the changes, the scale, the magnitude, and that work came into our home.
Right. Any one story, Tsedal, that gives us a flavor of that emerged from the research that you did, that epitomizes the struggle that you talked about even veterans go through?
Yes.
Which is fascinating to hear.
Yes. The stories, frankly, begins with the question of productivity. It's interesting. If I look at the last 13 or 14 months, since the pandemic became salient to most of us, and when I look at how companies and individuals have progressed, it began with worries around productivity and saying, oof, can work really get done? And I'd love to hear Bhargav thought on this to see if this is where he was as well. And so the first thing that people worried about was the question of productivity. And interestingly enough, I started to ask questions around, has productivity gone up for you, stayed the same for you, or gone down? In fact, I would love for people to respond to this question if possible,
yes,
and just say A, B, or C. For you, has productivity gone up, A, stayed the same, B, or gone down.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing. The first story then is related to this, and people started to do monitoring, micromanagement, because they were so worried about this. But I want to get some answers on this before I share a bit. Okay.
Yeah.
We have 1A, C. Okay, gone down. Okay, couple of A's. Let's see a bit more, and I'd like to weigh in on this. So when people and some folks are saying to themselves, "I am not going to answer this publicly." No, no way. But
it's a good mix.
It's a good mix, right? I see someone has said A and B
in pockets,
which is very interesting because it's dynamic, isn't it? It's quite dynamic. For some people, definitely gone down. It's interesting because the data on productivity and the research on productivity is as long as the presence of remote work. So we have data that are about 30 years, all the way to even the pandemic period, that says typically productivity increases with remote work. It doesn't decrease. It actually increases with remote work because people tend to value flex time. They value autonomy or being in control of their own work. They value the ability to kind of meld some of their responsibilities that they have in their lives that they can do during the day and then work extra to make up for the time. This is the typical picture. But the variance that I'm seeing in the answers are not surprising either, because certain things have to be met for productivity to work. One is the working conditions have to be conducive. Literally the real estate, the space that we use to do our work. So if we're tucked in the corner of our bedroom and trying to work from home, that is not conducive. Another issue is ambient noise, noisy children, whatever might be in your homes, intergenerational homes make it difficult. The other thing is, we are finding too that poor leadership negatively affects productivity. So if your manager is freaking out and is not doing all the things that you need to do in leadership, which is a topic that I'm sure we'll touch on, that makes a difference. And the other thing is, if there is no cohesion with your collaborators. So out of sight, out of sync, out of mind, out of touch, doesn't work for productivity. By the way, what is productivity? Here, productivity is defined as the output that's expected of you and your team. Like, merely, are you able to produce the deliverables that's expected of you? So that's a long answer to a simple question.
Sure. No, that was very helpful. Very helpful. Kavi, do you want to jump in or?
No, I'd love to have Bhargav's take on it.
Yes.
As to if that is productivity, and if typically it was A, did it go A to A plus, or did it go from A to A minus? How was it for you, Bhargav, when you started out very early on?
So I think what happened with us when we started out was the first maybe week, 10 days was a phase of reaction, right? So everyone was grappling with the crisis. We were somehow getting, laptops out. We had roughly about 80% of our staff by that time who used to work on laptops, 20% on desktops. We had to procure laptops, give it out, find, ways to get them dongles for internet connectivity, etc. So first 1 week was just crisis management. And I think all of us were trying to get used to this whole new, situation of doing something which we had never done. So we have been on, let's say, as an organization, been on Microsoft O365 for a long time. And some of our teams used to use Microsoft Teams, but not collectively as an organization. So we were all getting used to these digital tools that were available. We never used. But very soon what happened is, and it's been it's kind of a progress. So within maybe about a couple of weeks, when people settle down to this new way of working, all of us thought that we had a lot of time, right? So, you could start a meeting without any travel time lost. You don't commute for 3 hours in Bombay. So there's a lot of, lot of meetings that we ended up doing. And obviously, very soon after that, we had meeting fatigue. So, and then, the journey continues, and we kept adjusting to this, adapting to this new way of working. But, Tsedal is absolutely right. One of the questions that we grappled with and debated and discussed internally is what is going to happen to productivity. And we started measuring productivity. And exactly as she says, it's quite remarkable. Tsedal, I just wish your book had come out before we learned this on our own. but it's interesting. So we saw pockets where people were saying, "Oh wow, I'm now able to meet so many clients. I'm able to do town halls with 150 of my team across the country. I'm getting so much extra time to do meetings, etc." So for certain part of the organization, productivity went up. For certain, set of people who were processing data, for example, except for the fact that some people who didn't have broadband connectivity, which we provided to these people, and we saw a jump in productivity. So, and then, the story continued, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through the session. But as we look at it today, the answer that you saw, A and B, was one of my colleagues. So that's where we are at this point in time. I think that was Vasundhara who answered saying A and B. That's so in pockets, most of it we see productivity gain. In fact, reasonably significant gains.
Yeah.
In some pockets, we are seeing it's kind of flat. In certain areas, we've seen a drop as well. But most of those have some market events in terms of, maybe in sales, we've cut down on some areas, etc. Not because of working from home. It's for other reasons. So I would say mostly A and B.
Right. There are a couple of comments on that as well that are coming in, where people. I think Dr. Khandelwal said that, look, the whole notion of productivity is putting pressure on especially young leaders, right? And Tsedal, you mentioned this whole issue of surveillance and monitoring. It still goes on even after a year. So there's something fundamentally that's missing. I mean, and you've written a lot about trust, right,
Yes.
in your book.
Yes.
Maybe it's a good segue to really look at that. But do you want to kind of respond to people who are making the point that maybe these are extraordinary times, and productivity, while we do need higher productivity, but is that the best thing to measure?
Yeah, it's interesting because productivity becomes an important topic, because in the absence of that, people and organization and leaders feel like they're in crisis mode. Once people feel like, oh, we're actually able to advance our goals, despite the fact that we're all home and not at the workspace, people then can begin to think about, okay, well, how can we do this better? So that's why there's the emphasis on productivity. And I do agree that the anxiety levels for everyone went through the roof because can we pay the bills? Can we pay people? It really becomes fundamental and basic. And I get that completely. But when you are in a remote environment, and we've seen this around the world, this is not specific to a particular country or region, that you have to think differently about leading others. And yes, trust is a huge one. The writer Ernest Hemingway is one that I've been quoting a good deal lately, and I never quoted him pre-pandemic. So it just shows you how things have changed. But trust, he says, how do you know that others are trustworthy? By giving them trust. So you give trust, and you equip, you train, you help people perform well. But the idea that we need to watch and look at process shifts. We need to look at outcome. We need to equip people. It's a different way of thinking. The other thing about trust, though, it's not just from leader to others, but it's also how the group gels together. So if we think about trust, so the two topics, by the way, that have been most written about, most studied in remote, virtual, global work, the two topics, are just these: productivity and trust. And as Bhargav just mentioned, you need the enabling digital tools to tie those together. So the thing to understand about trust is that you have to think of it very differently in a remote work environment. And by that, I mean the way in which we've often thought about developing, maintaining trust, and having the bonding, the cohesion with our coworkers have to be regarded very differently. So enter what I have put up here called the trusting curve. It's similar to the learning curve, but our axis moves from learning to trust here, while the x-axis is time. So what does this mean, and why is it even here, and why are there actually two lines here in the graph, where there are two types of trust that are important in remote work? The first one is called swift trust. In my mind, it's the most liberating form of trust because it's grounded on two things. One, is my colleague dependable? Can I rely on this person? Is this person trustworthy? Do they do what they say they're going to do? The second aspect of swift trust is, do they have the competence or the qualifications to do this work? If you know these two things, check, you give them swift trust. And the collaboration can begin, and it's liberating. It's not the kind of trust that people often think about, which is the second type of trust called emotional trust. Emotional trust is grounded in the belief that others care about the things we care about. Our interest is important to them. Our difficulties are important to them. Emotional trust is particularly important for leaders to earn so that they can support their group and their teams. It takes longer to achieve, particularly in remote work. It requires frequent contact. It requires sharing of yourselves. It requires empathy that you reflect back to others. But that is not the gold standard that people are always after, this idea of emotional trust. If you achieve swift trust, you can work really well with your group and have this kind of liberating experience.
Right. Kavi?
Yeah, I mean, Ernest Hemingway, my favorite quote from Ernest Hemingway is, "How did he go bankrupt?" And the answer to that, he says, was gradually and then suddenly. So
I love that.
Yeah, and so I think trust is also something which happens gradually and then maybe suddenly. Those are elements about this kind of work where we're used to getting things in a particular manner, that we have to get used to things gradually and then suddenly things just fall in place. I'm curious, Bhargav, with yours. What were your early mistakes that you fell and you grouped yourselves and you picked up and you started going? Just as a teaser for us as we start thinking about what will enable and what will hinder. So just a bit of a teaser on what were some of your early mistakes?
Yeah, as I was saying, Kavi, so one of the early mistake was that we kind of let everything loose, right? So while we said that, there are these digital tools available, you can do your meetings. One of the things that you realize is that, what in a physical world would mean you just step out of your cabin or your desk and go across to someone else and resolve an issue. In a virtual world, you have to set up a meeting. So we had an overabundance of meetings, and I think some of the concerns that got articulated is very real. That are we creating too much of a pressure on people? Are we kind of creating this meeting fatigue because we are a series of meeting after meeting? Each of the meetings were probably very efficient because we are not wasting time. Meeting was starting at 10 and ending at 11, but just too many of them. So that was clearly one mistake. And one of the things that we've done through this, at least the 12 month, is a very constant engagement with the organization, right? With the larger teams, focus group interviews, surveys, cascades of initiatives, getting feedback from people. So very early, I think it was, if I remember, it was probably in June that we heard that this meeting fatigue was happening. So we came up with policies to say, silent hours. 2 to 3 you cannot have a meeting. We also tracked some people were starting meetings post 7 p.m. We said no meetings are allowed after 7 p.m. We also realized that we have kind of converted our physical processes to a virtual process. Everything was done in a meeting which did not require meetings. I mean, a lot of things could be done asynchronously. We as an organization was very headquarters centric. The entire senior team was in Bombay. There was a lot of social connect even otherwise. So as I said, people would just go across someone's place and resolve issues. Now you have to set up a meeting. And every issue was, any collaboration that happened was in person, oral, discussive, a lot of discussion. Now to do that in a virtual way, you could do it asynchronously. Move from an oral culture to a written culture. So these were some of the early learnings, if I can call it that. And I think the learning came through, honestly, by listening to our people a lot more in this phase. A lot of communication, I think Tsedal made a very important point of being authentic and opening yourself up. My sense is that I think most of the leaders in the organization were probably more accessible and more visible and more connected during this period than we normally would be, and that probably helped. So those were clearly some of the learnings. I mean, as we kept going through the process, we made mistakes, and we at least we tried to correct them.
Bhargav, you made that point even in the Clubhouse chat, which was quite interesting, and I forgot to mention that for our audience, how your antenna was turned towards technology companies, not your own industry insurance, right? Which was fascinating to hear. And you want to just spend a minute? I have a question for Tsedal on that, but I'll
Yeah. So, I guess, as I said, we were beginning to see that our earlier workflow and work processes and practices are not attuned for a virtual way of working. And by the way, here we are talking about a complete 100% work from home environment. My sense is that when we move into hybrid model, at least what we've thought about as an organization is design some of the things that cannot be done virtually, in our opinion, at this point in time. Organize our work process in a manner that some of those things will happen in office, and some of the things that can be done virtually will happen from home. So it will be a hybrid model. It will not be obviously a complete work from home model. But in the first couple of months, that was the situation. We were all in a lockdown. Now you realize when you get into these these challenges and the mistakes that we discussed, you look around for learnings, right? You look around to see who's done this better, and obviously it's not our industry. It's probably the tech industry and global organizations. And global organizations anyway have been working remotely. I think again, Tsedal make that point, for 20-25 years, people have been working remotely. So honestly, the learning was probably best available in the tech industry. So that's what we studied, researched, reached out, talked to people to figure out how they.
In fact, that is the most interesting part, because I think Nilufer has asked a very interesting question, where she said that why is it then that large organizations like Microsoft and Google are asking their teams to come back to office and prep their workforce for coming back rather than adapting to the new way of working? So what does your research tell you?
It's interesting because, Bhargav, I'm like, yes. So I'm here jumping up and down listening to you with all the insights that you're sharing, and even with the digital tools. And I have some thoughts on that as well. But listen, the data around the future of work, that's what you're asking about, right? Microsoft and others are thinking about the future of work, but I don't think they're asking everyone to come back fully, except for Goldman Sachs asking folks to come back, saying that remote work is an aberration. But here's what they're all worried about. And I've had a chance to talk to a number of people. They're worried about losing control, losing culture. And I always say to them, the culture of your organization, as you've known it, is no more. It no longer exists. It's gone. But this idea that they want to go back and retain this old way of working is going to be surprising to them. We've looked at some companies and some organizations that have started to bring people back, very small amounts, not even big numbers. We're talking about just a handful because we still are in the middle of a global pandemic. And what most individuals are learning, the people who are coming back, is that it's actually shocking. Someone used the word jarring recently, that they're back to the hour commute one way. And for many people, there's expenditures throughout the day that they made, even if it's very small. They're finding that they were actually saving money by not commuting to work, not just time, but also money. The other thing is, these companies believe that the equity and interactions among their teams would work better if everyone was co-located. But the reality is that is not even quite possible nowadays, and don't know when it's going to be possible, because our physical spaces have transformed as well. You walk into the buildings, you see all sorts of signs that's pandemic related. People have masks on. Where people used to walk into conference rooms, 6 people, 7 people, we have some for 12 people at the Harvard Business School. You're not going to jam 12 people in there anymore because of social distancing, right? So you might have 3, 4 people in there, and the rest are dialing in from their desks. Right. Or from their homes. So the world has completely changed. And the sooner people recognize that, the sooner we begin to build design for a much more realistic view of today.
Terrific. Kavi, you want to kind of pick up the threads on that? Because I think it takes us directly into the next section.
Yes, and let's get to the next section directly, which is about trying to find out what inhibits and what enables. And let's first, before we get your answers and your answers from the world of theory and practice, let's check in with the audience. So we're going to put up a poll on Menti. So yes, you can, and this is how you go to it. Please go to menti.com, www.menti.com. If you go to menti.com, and there is a passcode out here, which is 694-62412. It's there on the screen. This will give us enough and more of an opportunity to dive into specific issues that you may be having. So 694-62412.
Yeah, there are 2 questions that we've asked you, and we'll look at the results of question 1 to start with. But there are 2 questions. One is, you can see it on your screen for the benefit of our panelists. What is the most critical thing that has helped firms deal with remote work during the pandemic? And there are multiple choices, and we'll flash the results as soon as you've had chance to complete it. And there's another one as well, which we'll flash in once it's done. Here it is. We were just about talking about it. What is the single biggest skill that leaders will need to develop for remote work? Again, multiple choices there, which we'll flash the results once people have completed. We'll just take a minute, and I think we can continue with the conversation, Kavi, maybe, while people, kind of take a minute or so to complete the.
Okay, so even as they're completing, so Bhargav, what's your take? What's one thing that's helped you, and what's one thing that's come in the way? First, your short take, and then we'll look at what the audience is saying, and then we'll expand on that. Yes, Bhargav, yours.
Yeah, so I think what's helped is probably as an organization, I believe that ours are reasonably open-minded in terms of experimentation. I don't think we would have been able to do what we've done, and time will tell if it works for us in the long term. But at this stage, I think we've been able to make a lot of adjustments, and that's only because people are very, very adaptive. I think that's one. I think the second, the inhibitor remains certain skill set gaps that we have to kind of work on, and certain mindset issues. And mindsets could be, obviously it's not a uniform mindset. I mean, you have a very large population, believing in the advantages. There would be some people finding some challenge with this issue, and worrying about it. So it's a question of the mindset. So, for example, again, Tsedal talked about trust-based, management. Absolutely vital. I think that's the big piece that we're working on right now. I mean, how do we change our leadership roles across the organization from being managers to coaches, and let people be and do what they do anyway very well. I mean, we've always had an empowering culture, but there is still that physical oversight that people were used to. And 1 year has passed. It's still been fine, but still that trust-based culture is, in terms of performance management aspect, is an important area to build on.
Okay. I love, by the way, this mindset shift from managers to coaches and let people be. I mean, that's like Ernest Hemingway level of quote right there. That's profound. That's so profound. I just wanted to highlight it. That's huge. If people did that, wow.
Terrific.
Yeah.
What's been your experience, Tsedal? When you say if people did that, wow. So what's your experience?
The experience is more around being very nervous and micromanaging, or even if you're leaving people alone, you're very nervous. But what I'm hearing when you say move from being managers to coaches, it's a completely different way of looking at things. It's giving people the autonomy, but coaching them where you need to help them perform better. You know, the chief people officer of TIAA, which is a financial management company where a lot of people's retirements, etc., are. He talked about this is not an era for ordinary leadership. We've got to be better. You cannot be an ordinary leader who just looks and sees what people are doing and be commanding in a remote environment. It just doesn't work. And what this leads to, and I want to comment on what someone wrote in the comments saying that they've gone from working from 12 to about 16, 17 hours. What it does when leaders don't do exactly what Bhargav described is that people get into what's called hyper-productivity mode. They work more hours. They're trying to keep up. They're anxious. The boundaries between work and non-work are blurring. And on average, when you get into hyper-productivity mode, which is what represents in the comment earlier from 12 to 16, 17 hours, you actually get into burnout. You start to feel negatively about your organization. You lose motivation. And this hyperproductivity is a result of poor management all around.
Right. Terrific. Kavi, I think that we're ready with the results. Should we move to see what the audience feels? And more, all yours. There it is. Oh boy, it is. We'll have to.
Wow.
Okay. So organization trust has the, and they've been listening very closely to both of you, I think Tsedal and Bhargav. Yeah, we can read this better. I think infrastructure is about 18%, but overwhelmingly organizational trust emerges as the key.
Wonderful, right? Yeah.
And we'd asked about whether a next-gen workforce, a younger workforce would really help, but only 13%, which I guess in India, and we can discuss that, we're mostly multi-generational workforces. So it'll be, of course, there are lots of BPOs and other folks who have a much younger. You spend some time with SAP Labs, Tsedal as well, right? The cohort there is much younger, right, compared to a SAP mothership in that sense. So, but how would you? Is this in line with what you would have thought of?
It is, and it's interesting because organizational trust is a proxy for a number of things, right? If we think about what does it really mean, it means leadership, it means cohesion, it means providing people what they need in order to autonomously work well. I'm struck by processes and skills as well, because I would even think about merging them, because processes are things you can control. To me, that means our practices, our routines have to differ. And skills means knowledge that we employ. The thing I like about those two is that those are very fixable, right? You can fix process, you can fix skills, you can fix trust, but trust is an org culture element that is very difficult to change if the leaders of the organizations aren't committed to that change. And what we're finding is the leaders, particularly if leaders are of a certain generation, I'm part of that generation, so this is not me talking about others, I'm talking about us. If they don't adjust, if they don't really understand that the world has dramatically changed and are actively revising their cultural norms, this trust number will be as high as it is. And it's unfortunate, because I think the future of work that we're talking about is just the beginning. It's gradual, and suddenly we're going to be in a digital revolution. Right, Abhi?
If I can add, I think completely agree with Tsedal that this is also a generational issue. Couple of personal experiences, right? So my sense is a lot of the concerns that we have at our generation, in our generation, is also because we are looking at it from our lens of having got, we are not digital natives, right? We grew up in a different world. But two personal experiences. One is, inside my home, my daughter did a internship for about 3 months in this period, joined a company, never physically attended any meeting, never physically met anyone, and then completed her project after 3 months and went back to college. So I asked her at the end of the session, didn't you find it odd that you never physically met any of your colleagues? Wasn't that a constraint? She was almost surprised that I was asking her that question. So maybe the generation sees this very differently. And the second example is when I, every month, all the new recruits that we have, I have a town hall, just a, kind of a open session, just answering the questions. And I've been asking this question, and the way I've been phrasing it is to say that, you must have a tremendous problem joining us, because you joined us in a virtual environment and, you never met anyone physically. We couldn't do the normal welcoming process that we do physically. And almost consistently, I get a message that it's not been a big problem. Of course, there's some teething issues. Some people say that, I wish my manager spent a bit more time with me, but the organizational processes and, the comfort with joining virtually is very high with young people. So,
no, it's interesting that
my sense is it's also a generational issue.
Sure. It's interesting that you bring it up, because there's a interesting conversation going on the chat, which is about the other cohort, which is around women, professional women, right? And Bhargav, I know you've had some listening sessions as well to what they were going through during the early part of the pandemic and even later. Do you want to kind of share any stories that you heard?
Yeah, so obviously for women, it was significantly more challenging, right? I mean, managing the work at home, the home related issues, and there are these unfortunate cultural aspects in that sense, right? And some of the feedback that we were getting about meeting fatigue, stretched work time, etc. All of that was definitely more elevated among our women. But equally, there was a couple of very interesting, feedbacks that we got. So someone said that, look, this gives me a lot more flexibility. Earlier, I would have to leave home at 8 o'clock, and maybe after a 1.5 or 2 hour commute, I come back home at 7, at around 8:30. Now today, so in a sense, I was stuck to be, I couldn't do my work, in this period. Now I can adjust and I have more flexibility. If I want to work, for my kid, I want to do something for my child, between 10 to 11, that's a choice that I have. So as long as I have the flexibility and I'm not, inundated by meeting requests and stuff like that, there is an advantage that I can kind of be a bit flexible about how I manage both. But clearly for women, it was definitely much more challenging.
Right. Tsedal, would you like to kind of add anything from your experience and your research?
Yes, absolutely. What Bhargav just described is called flex time. And when we look at all the data around remote work, flex time is fully connected to job satisfaction. And people who say, this feels realistic to me in terms of my own demands and be able to take advantage of it. But I will also say that a lot of women feel the pressure of their professional and their home lives, particularly because of the pandemic. And not only, I think, is it important to embrace flex time, but to remove any shame from it, to normalize it, particularly today, because we want our women in the workforce who are fantastic contributors. We don't want to lose people. In many instances, they are reducing their hours or even taking a break from work, which is the kind of attrition that will cost organizations in the future. But imagine if we normalized and, in fact, celebrated flex time and trust that people will get their work done. Goes back to that org trust, right? Organizational trust issue. Flex time is so important. And it's not just for women, it's also for other members of families that have responsibilities. It's for those of us who may be caring, elder care issues. So it's flex time is something that we can really take advantage of. And I typically call it the gift that remote work gives us that we can really lean into.
Yes, in fact,
Sorry, if I can add to what Tsedal just said. So one of the things that we've launched, and this is possible today, which we never had earlier, is part-time work. And we've said that you can work for 4 hours; it will be a proper employment. And we are just hoping that we'll be able to attract more women who are willing to work maybe 4 hours because of their personal commitment for other things. Maybe they don't. I mean, whoever doesn't want to work for 8-9 hours. So, and in a sense, we are actually hoping that this model will make us much more inclusive. Time will tell whether it will, but we are hoping it will.
So it's interesting what Vasundhara, I think, wrote in the chat box. Vasundhara is Tsedal Bhargav's colleague. She was part of the Clubhouse chat. She's saying that actually remote work is making things more inclusive for women, which is very interesting because we've always had the problem of buddy groups going out for a beer and not including the women at work. So I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I've heard that many times, that there's something about the fact that we're all in a screen of sorts that democratizes our work, that democratizes our ability to have relationships. And my big statement about this too is my husband brought it up, not me. He's 6'4", I'm 5'4", which is the average height for a woman. On Zoom, we're the same height. Finally. But it's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah. But Kavi makes this point in our team calls about what this does for leaders when they find themselves as a one square box on a large screen. Kavi, do you want to kind of build on that point?
That's right. I mean, your leaders do not have the big chair, the big cabin, the big office. They're as a small rectangle tile as anyone else. And in more than one way, I sit next to the big boss, and the big boss sits next to the most ordinary person. So in a way, it's democratizing. In a way, and that's also an interesting segue into the future, it means a new set of mindsets for leaders and how power gets distributed in an organization. And therefore, for us to explore that for this kind of work, in this kind of hybrid work, how must a leadership mindset start shifting? And so that's an interesting and important area for us to explore as well. So Tsedal, what's your view, and what are some of the
Yes.
things you're seeing the world over?
Yes, yes, yes. So I actually think that once we do this mindset shift, yes, you don't have the physicality, you don't have the big chair, the commanding, the presence that you're used to. But what you do have newly is more people have more access to you, which is what we're hearing. Leadership visibility has gone up and up and up and up because there typically you have leaders who travel all over, but they have to really think about, where do I go to maximize my one human time? But now you have access to people. And the advice that I've been giving leaders all year and continue to do that is that be more visible. Let people hear you. Let people feel you. And so people who never got a chance to even glimpse their leaders, now they can actually hear them, which is always great for the leadership work. And here I'm talking about capital L leaders, right? I'm not talking about managers who you get to see regularly. Capital L leaders, meaning those who are at the top of the house. The other things, though, that leaders need to think about is, how do I become present in a productive way? How often do I need to check in on people? Who do I need to check in on? How do I think about motivating people from a distance? How do I facilitate connection for people? So today, leaders have to actually facilitate the connection, the bonding that needs to take place among team members, because it won't happen naturally. Another thing is, when you hire new people in this remote world, how do you do onboarding? How do you ensure that people feel connected to the organization and to others? Leaders have to facilitate that. On top of that, you've got to coach, you've got to teach, you've got to ensure that people have healthy boundaries in place. And so those, I think, are important leadership challenges, but we also have to be very clear about the pros and cons that leaders have to deal with. And I'll mention this one last one, because I know this is a conversation. We can come back to any of these points or raise new ones, is how do we ensure that people feel that leaders are equitable? That everyone is getting equal opportunity to connect with them, to get coaching? Or how do we make sure that in a hybrid environment, Kavi, as we started our conversation, some people may be physically present, others may not be physically present? How do we make sure that people don't suffer from FOMO, fear of missing out? And how do we make sure that leaders have very thoughtful, inclusive ways of working, even if they don't see every member of the group?
Terrific. And there's some wonderful comments, I think, coming in. Love the stuff that all of you are sharing. Really, it adds so much of meaning to what we're talking about, to hear what individual experiences have been. I think we're ready with the results of the second poll, Kavi. So should we kind of take a look?
Yes.
Okay, super. So these were the options: running effective and inclusive virtual meetings. This was a question, sorry. Single biggest skill that leaders ought to develop for remote work. Empowering colleagues to work without supervision. Planning the right mix of interpersonal and asynchronous work. Right. Preserving the firm's culture. And Tsedal, you spoke about that, how culture is not what it used to be. So we'd love to hear a little more on that. And managing a multi-generational workforce hasn't. So there are 3 blocks which didn't get the top rank, but clearly, empowering colleagues to work without supervision emerges as the biggest skill most people believe. Reaction, Tsedal first, and then Bhargav.
Well, it's this. I mean, if you look at our earlier poll, you can juxtapose this poll to that poll, right? This idea of empowering without supervision is directly related to trust, isn't it? You know,
Yes.
And so that consistency is striking to me. The other thing that I find striking as well is, and I really want to talk about this because it's come up in so many ways and it's triggering a lot of thoughts for me, is how do you make sure that you're working effectively using digital tools, not only to avoid things like tech exhaustion, but also understanding how to use synchronous and asynchronous, all of those things. We have some very good systematic ways of thinking about those. It's actually chapter 4 in my book, one of my favorite chapters, because it can literally transform how we work if we really understand when to work synchronously, asynchronously, what tools to use. There are many ways to think about this. And so that also stands out for me.
Terrific. Bhargav?
Yeah, I think, I'm happy to see that, empowering leadership has got them, number one. That would be my, view. But just to kind of touch upon or add to the comments that Tsedal made, again, one of the biggest learning for us in this 1 year has been this asynchronous and synchronous. As I said earlier, we never had anything called asynchronous as a practice. We were not used to written notes being sent across the organization. We were not used to pre-reads. We were not used to chatting in the, using online chat, Slack channel kind of stuff. So all of these skills we had to learn. So today, in our organization, you can't do a meeting if you haven't prepared my meetings, I have to have a note at least 24 hours before the meeting. Otherwise, I don't do the meeting. And these are some of the things that are kind of learnings that we had to, in a sense, learn. Journey of discovery, I call it. The other big point is this fact that geography is history. Again, another thing that we keep saying, this, the biggest advantage of this is the fact that you can reach out to 200 people at a go. Someone may be in Northeast India, someone may be in Bangalore, someone may be in Patna, and someone may be in Pune, and you can all do all of that together. I mean, when could you ever do that? And that's a very, very powerful, in a sense, capability that we have today. And one of the things that we've had as an organization is a lot of these leadership engagements, because what we did, just to give a bit of a background, is after about 3-4 months, sometime in June, we went back and did a very detailed FGD with our teams in terms of what is it that you kind of are struggling with. As I said, some of these excessive meetings, etc. But a lot of other insights came to us. One was, the leadership communication, the informal engagement that people had, the chai ki tapri. I mean, what you would call a coffee, coffee table conversation, or some of the things like tacit learning, some of the issues like virtual collaboration across cross-functional teams. So we had a focused groups which were working on each of these individual components of redesigning how we want to engage with people. Celebration, so celebrating success is a big part of our culture, right? So just a thank you or a pat on the back, or do a weekly catch up and maybe go out for a lunch together. We have large organizational celebration platforms. How do we do it virtually? What we benefited, interestingly, is that we are now able to involve the families into these processes. So some of our organizational celebrations, now we have families involved. I think that's very powerful. Personally, I want to continue to hold on to it even when we go to physical celebration, whenever we do. So there are lots of pluses and some of the challenges that we are talking about in terms of ensuring that the culture gets built on. We are obviously have a lot of social capital that we are leveraging to continue with this trust. But how do we get the younger people who are coming in, engaged? How do we acculturize them? How do we build the engagement on an ongoing basis? I think these are all learnings that we have to work on.
Super. Tariq?
Yes, I just want to ask one specific question. I often find that leaders, when they adapt to the digital way of working, just try and cope with it. They don't relearn or reimagine their work for the digital format. I think both these are two different ways of thinking about it. You can extend yourself for digital and just skim the surface, or reimagine yourself very differently to make the most of the digital world. I would think, and I would like a response from both of you, I would think the pandemic has forced most of us to cope and just skim the surface with digital. What is it going to, what is it, what will it take for us to help all of us to reimagine for the digital world in itself? I'm just thinking that it requires a reimagination. So I'm posting the question to both of you. Tsedal first.
I think you're absolutely right. And we must not only reimagine, we really need to upgrade, upskill, rethink, not only how we lead, but what does it mean to be leaders in the digital? And earlier I talked about, this box. Another analogy that I often make is that we've entered a world where it's television rather than theater, which was the old way of leading, that uses your physicality, your presence, and you're trying to create a kind of whatever you want, the ripple effect of it through physical presence. In this digital world, not only do we need to understand tools very, very well, we need to rethink how we lead. And yes, people have been surviving, but it's time to move to this thriving world. And the reason for this is not only to be better leaders that the time calls for, but I also think that in very short order, because this pandemic has accelerated the virtualization of work, it's also really accelerated the digital transformation of many, many companies. Here I'm talking about the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, all the ways in which our world is going to be upended yet again. This is what it's bringing to bear. So if we are not changing our relationship with learning and technology and entering this continuous learning phase, and if we're not evolving, we're actually not going to be able to survive, as work itself is about to get completely disrupted in the next year or two. I truly believe this.
No, this is music to our ears, Tsedal. The whole idea of continuous learning and the role that technology will play going forward, this is at the core of what we believe at Founding Fuel as well. I know Bhargav has a very strong point of view on technology as well, because ICICI Lombard has been at the forefront of pushing the envelope. Where are you on that journey, and what do you see that perhaps other companies ought to recognize as well, other CEOs?
Yeah, thanks, Aji. So you're right. I think from our perspective, we've always been a big believer in technology. So all the AI, ML, using IoTs for risk management. This has been a journey that we've been on for a fairly long time. And in a sense, a lot of conversation within the organization was about putting the customer in the center. What I think has happened in this journey has been to answer Kavi's specific question on what do we have to do as leaders. I think there has been I would say there are two big learnings that I believe leaders of should have taken from this experience. One is the importance of resilience, right? Which is all the markets kind of push us to focus on efficiency and look at cost and all of that, but I think the important lesson that this pandemic should have taught us is resilience. And the second, from a leadership perspective, is empathy. So when you look at the employee question, how do you put the employee at the center when you're designing your organization, right? And that's, I believe, very important. But the point that Kavi is making in terms of our transition to be really digitally adaptive, I think we are, personally, I can say I'm on a journey. I mean, I've just probably done what Kavi is saying. We've just stretched a bit to get used to using Teams, and that's it. maybe a bit of asynchronous working habits, but we still have to keep progressing in that journey. So one of the calls that we've taken as an organization is that we are permanently will be a hybrid organization. Now, time will tell whether it's the right decision or not, but we've taken the decision. Part of the decision is that as leaders, all of us compulsorily have to work from home at least 1 or 2 days a week. The reason why we've done that is to, one, address the point that if you are always in office, you will probably have a bias towards people who come to office, right? You have to give the message that remote work and work from home is equally, productive, and equally we trust you to work from home. And the second is all of us will hopefully keep on being forced to learn new skills to be, in a sense, good leaders in a digital environment.
You put it so well, Bhargav. This whole thing of leaders as role models and role modeling the new behavior, as it were. I'm just wondering, and this is a question for both of you as a follow-up, is there scope for reverse mentoring, you believe, and a little more of that so that people like us in our generation find it easier? Because I look around, the children they're all digital natives and this comes naturally to them. It doesn't come today. I was struggling with Google Sheets before this call and I had to lean on Anmol, who's our producer, and boom, he solved it in no time. But I'm just wondering, is that something that might be useful to think about, Bhargav, and then maybe Tsedal?
No, absolutely. I talk to my nephews, and they tell me that Discord is the place to be, right? If you really want to understand how to work on these things, and I still don't know how to. I'm not there. So and there is a huge amount of learning that you need to get from the generation which is digital natives. It's up to us whether we want to make that adjustment. One of the things that I get when I do this town hall with new recruits is a bunch of very good insights and very good ideas. I wouldn't call it a reverse mentoring process. It's a town hall, that's it. But it's clearly an opportunity to learn from this generation.
Yeah. So, Tsedal, there's a lovely quote from our friend Jane McConnell. She's based in the south of France, and we'll talk about her project that's coming up at the end of this masterclass. She says we should think about the forgetting curve as well.
Ooh.
You have to learn how to give
Wow.
which I thought was a terrific way of putting
Sign
it.
me up. Sign me up. I love that, this forgetting curve. And we need to do that on a gradually but very suddenly kind of thing. No, I think the gap in our understanding with technology needs to be filled. There's no option there. And Indrajit, you know that before the remote work revolution book got accelerated because of this pandemic, I was working on a book called The Digital Mindset, what we really need to know in the age of data, algorithms, and AI with my collaborator Paul Leonardi, and we're talking about what are the skills that individuals and leaders need for the digital economy. It includes a little bit of understanding of technology. We need to understand where data live. We need to understand systems architecture. We need to understand how to appraise data. Yes, that means a little bit of statistics as well. And so we need to retool and be ready for the digital economy. And there is no option. Either we participate or we don't.
Right. And what do you see organizations doing in terms of preparing leaders for this future?
I don't think organizations are doing as much as they want to. I talk to people all the time, and large numbers of people, and I will ask the question: how many of you are talking about digital? I just say digital. I don't even say transform. I say digital. And if there's 100 people in the room, 98 will raise theirs. And okay, what does that mean? I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. So everyone understands and knows that we are entering a digital first world, a digital first economy. And one of the things that we have tracked in the last 13 months is that the companies that were the most advanced digitally are those that are doing well today. that were able to very quickly pivot, down to those companies that were brick and mortar companies that have gone e-commerce very, very quickly because they had already done the preparation. So I just think that people know and understand that the world is changing in this digital way, but they don't know how to get there. They don't know how much to learn. But we believe that it's a few set of things that you need to understand. We talk about this in terms of the 30% rule, meaning in language, we all speak at least the English language on this call. For non-native speakers of the English language to operate really well at the workplace, they only need about 30% of native-like knowledge of the English language. The same thing with technology. You don't need to be an engineer and be an expert in machine learning, but you need to have a 30% understanding of how things function so you can ask the right questions, that you can make the right decisions, that you can design the right organizations.
Terrific. Bhargav, you want to kind of, okay, Kavi, sorry, go ahead. You wanted
No,
to.
I think we're moving into a segment around what's your predictions about the future. And that's that. How do you think hybrid will kind of hold up in the next few years? What's your take?
So Bhargav already articulated what they think they'll do, and I think that's the exact right thing to do. And some of the rationale that he presented included empathy, right? To make sure that people had the right lens. I think that, first of all, whatever policies that are getting set around the hybrid workforce have to be regarded as experiments. So you have to cast them as an experiment, because no doubt you're going to make changes to it because the future is still being written. So if you're thinking we're going to do this for 1 day a week, twice a week, you may end up doing it 3 days a week. Or some companies are saying, we'll ask people to come in for 2 weeks out of the month only, and it'll be the first 2 months. Others are saying, we will let people decide when they come in. And the tech companies are leading the way on this because they've been experimenting with remote work for many years. They know it's going to work, and they have the technology to be able to accommodate people. And so with the hybrid policy, I think, first of all, it's important to have anonymous surveys where you understand real preferences. What do people want? Because the data, at least that we've been collecting at the Harvard Business School online or the Gartner Group over the last couple of months, is that up to 81 to 87%, the Harvard Business School online survey shows that 81% want to retain some form of remote work. The Gartner Group survey shows 87% want to retain some form of remote work. Some 30% want full-time remote work. Like, I don't even want to go in. I just want full-time. Yeah, I'll go in here and there, but I want to be regarded as a full-time remote worker. And then you have about 13, 14, 15%, depending on which survey, where people say, I hate it. I don't like this. I want to go back to the office. I miss people. I'm isolated. This is not for me. And so in looking at that, and in looking at the kind of work that we do, from products to services, we need to set policies centrally. So individual managers should not make these decisions, because this is how you're going to have, well, so-and-so's manager lets him do this, and so-and-so's manager doesn't. Ooh, disaster. So it has to be centrally mandated, like anything related to diversity and digital. It has to be centrally mandated. And then we need to be explicit, back to the skills and processes in the data that we saw just in your polls, on what our norms are going to be. we have to be explicit about what our processes are going to be. And we need to make sure that they're adaptive to the remote environment. And my book can help with all of those things. In fact, chapter 1 is all about how you set your work up for success in terms of process and other things. And then finally, you want to upskill people. Give people training, coaching, skills, because remote work is not something that we will automatically be great at through experience. It's actually a social science.
Got it. Bhargav, do you want to kind of give you want to share your perspective of the future? I know you've done a bit of that, but if you want to just stretch a little more.
So just to give some data to Tsedal. So we did the same thing in the sense that after enough internal brainstorming, etc., we launched the policy that we will be hybrid forever, and we gave choice to people to vote. I mean, to basically decide what they wanted to do. Of course, depending upon the type of job, a sales guy in Bombay cannot be sitting in Patna, but we've given 4 or 5 options. One is remote work from your base location. If you're from Bombay, you work from Bombay, but you work 100% from home. Off-base work. So you're from, your earlier office base was Bombay, but the work doesn't need you to come to Bombay, and you want to work from Raipur, so be it. So there's a second off-base, but again, 100% remote work. Third is 100% work from office. Fourth is a hybrid, which is you can choose 2 days of working from home, 3 days working from office, etc., and vice versa. So the numbers are roughly about, if I remember the number correctly, about 7% of people have opted for off-base work. Another roughly about low teens have opted for 100% work from home, but from the base. So about 20% will be 100% working from home, whether at the same location or elsewhere. Roughly about 15% have said that I want to work 100% from office. But the big chunk, almost 2/3 of the organization is saying I want flexibility. And we've designed that way, and we've kind of changed our employee app to book seats. We've made a hot sitting organization. We've done all of those changes to allow people to come in when they want to and book a seat and things like that. So we'll see how it works. Honestly, the challenge in terms of predicting the future is, of course, Tsedal has done a lot of work. I mean, she will have a lot more conviction. For us, it's a journey of discovery, right? It has been a bunch of experimentation, and we're seeing what works. So what we'll continue to do is be flexible and see what is working for our people, for our business, and maybe be adapt to what works for us. And my sense is this will be true for most organizations, right? I mean, what works for us may not work for another organization. The culture there may be different, and I think organizations would have to figure out what is working from them. But from our perspective, we are seeing tremendous benefit. And if you see the numbers, roughly 80% of the people are saying that we don't want to come to office, or actually 85% of the people are saying we don't want to come to office all the day. That's telling you what employees are asking for. And if you don't provide this as an organization, our belief is you will not attract the best talent.
Yeah.
because organizations which provide the flexibility will attract the best talent, is our view. Time will tell whether it's correct.
Terrific. Avi,
Okay, the last question that I probably will ask Bhargav is, Tsedal has been telling the corporate world what they should possibly do. If you were to ask Tsedal what she should study about hybrid in the future, what would that be?
I think the answer was in our commentary, right? So I think some of the things, Tsedal, you talked about the challenges of leadership. So in a physical world, in a physical meeting, you see body language, you see reactions, you see this entire room, you get a sense of the the collective state of affairs, which you miss, right? So how do you build those capabilities? I'm sure you've thought about some of these things. Maybe it's there in your next book that is coming. Some of it is in your current book, I know. But I think some of these challenges. So when we think about the long-term consequence of remote work or flexible work, the question about continuing engagement, the glue that we had, we built the organizational glue because of the physical journey that we've had with people.
And that social capital is what we're leveraging today. How do we build on that social capital? How do we ensure that the tacit learning which people have when they come to office, they see someone else doing something and learn on that basis. We don't have a structured training program for that. How do we build some of those capabilities in a virtual world or a digital world or a flexi world? How do we manage the workflow which is part in office, part in home, and how do you conduct meetings in that environment? So some of the next level journeys is what we are kind of trying to figure out. Would love to hear your views.
Great issue.
Well, the good news is the book itself, Remote Work Revolution: Succeeding from Anywhere, covers all of that and more. Listen, there's 50 years worth of research on this. This thing that we're talking about, hybrid, or some people have talked about it as distributed work, where we're not all co-located. We know all of the failure points. We know all the ways to make them successful. This has been studied by so many groups in the information systems environment, in sociology, communication scholars, group scholars. There's 50 years worth of data that says you can do it. You can do it extremely well, even when you don't have access to the physical presence. And the last thing I'll say about, so basically it's on the book, and it's available. These are not new issues, but they're newly being applied. And one of the types of mindsets that we need to bring into our domestic work even is the global logic. Global organizations' work logic has to enter our work today, because when you're globally distributed, you don't have access to the face-to-face in the way that you do. There are many people who are right here today who work with others in other countries that they've never physically met, but they've done it really well. You now need to do the same thing with those who are in country with you as well. It's a application of these existing global logics that we need to bring into our work. But the good news is there are so many examples of how to thrive in this environment. You just have to think about this differently. You do innovation differently. You do tacit learning differently. You do onboarding differently. You do leadership differently. You do collaboration differently. So gone are our in-person paradigms, and here are our distributed work paradigms, and that's the thing to do.
Terrific. I mean, Tsedal's book, of course, for the audience, I think is a wonderful read. We've had the good fortune of having read it and attended some of our discussions around her book. Been terrific. I do have a request to the both of you, because this whole idea is to stimulate new thinking, right? So apart from your book, Tsedal, is there anything else that you and Bhargav would like to recommend people read? Books, particularly, because reading is certainly under pressure. We acknowledge that. But you really can't learn unless you're doing your quota of reading. Bhargav does as well, I'm sure, like you do. So any things that you would like to recommend to our community in terms of, other than your book, of course, which people must read?
Oh, absolutely. I actually would recommend Karim Lahani and Marco Iacitti's book, Competing in the Age of AI, Strategy and Leadership When Algorithms, Networks Run the World. If you have an opportunity to read one book right now, I would really strongly recommend Competing in the Age of AI, because it'll take you to a different place that says, woof, I'm worried about being in a meeting with people I'm not sitting with. Look at where the world is going. Let's think very, very differently.
Terrific. I mean, he's such a fine mind. We had the good fortune of hosting him a year before at the Masterclass, and lovely, great person as well to interact with. Bhargav, your turn.
Yeah, so obviously recommend Tsedal's book. I've not completed it, but I've just started going through it. Fascinating book for this aspect. I've not read anything else in this topic, but there are two books that come to my mind for the digital world. One, in terms of your leadership style, and this is a book called The Mind of the Leader. I think he talks about three traits. One is mindfulness, second is selflessness, and third is compassion. Of course, he gives a lot of examples of why these are important. These are, nothing, no rocket science. There are a lot of books have been written about this, but I quite like this book, The Mind of the Leader. And the second book, which is more for AI, etc., is Prediction Machines. Ajay Agarwal, and we've had the good fortune of having him with our leadership team of outstanding thought process of bringing in the economic and the commercial angle to what it will do, the AI revolution. Is quite a fascinating book.
Terrific. Those are wonderful recommendations, and we promise to share that the links and all of that to our readers. I'm really conscious of the time. We've overshot already by 4 minutes. So any final comments, Kavi, because I have a special announcement to make, and wonderful to have both of you, Tsedal and Bhargav. It was terrific.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Super. Kavi,
Yes.
anything?
Yep.
Because
Wonderful, great conversation, many takeaways, and we should all go back and reflect on it. And,
yes.
Yes, over to you, IJ.
Yes. So we've got some exciting announcement to make as well for our next masterclass. And we will put up a poster that will give you a sense. This is the one that is planned on the 24th of May, and with Jane McConnell, Ravi Venkatesan, and Santosh Desai. This is around, it's a lovely takeoff really from, you've provided wonderful platform for us to explore another aspect of culture and the worker really, who will in some ways catalyze this change that we're talking about. So the bold new breed and the whole concept of gig mindset is something that Jane McConnell, essentially, who's analyst, strategic advisor, and the author of this upcoming book on the gig mindset advantage. She's with us this evening as well. In fact, she reminded us that forgetting curve is actually not hers, but it's a Sri K. Prahlad term coined by him, no less. So this is the concept. We think it's really powerful and exciting, because who are these gig mindsetters? You can read. These are the guys who will bring about the change that we seek. I know Kavi has spent a lot of time with Jane as we have at Founding Fuel. She's a good friend of Founding Fuel, and we worked with her on this book and helped her kind of move along with her research in India. But this is the finale, really. What you're looking at, the poster, is really what comes at the end of almost a month-long program, where we're doing, we open with a essay that Jane has done on the concept exclusively, which is already live on Founding Fuel this evening. You can go and look it up. But I'd suggest that you register, because for this program, all those who've registered for this masterclass will automatically get pre-registered, so you don't have to bother. But others who haven't done it would be encouraged to register, because there are many things that are going to happen on this program. There'll be 2 clubhouse chats. Kavi is going to be in conversation with Jane. We're inviting 2 leaders from Decathlon to share their journey on how they became catalysts of change within their organization, and culminating in the masterclass. And all of this is kind of lubricated with conversations and curated readings on LinkedIn Live. We're going to open up that group as well. But Kavi, why do you think this is important?
Well, I think it's very important. Like what we discussed today, I think this has been a perfect runway to building a gig mindset. So in a hybrid world, a gig mindset will be the perfect crown. So it's important for us to get that mindset, and therefore it's important for all of us to invest our time and energy and resources in just broadening our horizons around what that is and understanding it, so that we'll be able to capitalize on a far more digitalized world. IG, over to you.
Yes. So we're having some wonderful feedback coming in, Tsedal and Bhargav. Absolute pleasure to have both of you, and thank you so much, all the members of the audience who've taken time off at a very difficult and challenging moment in our lives. So really appreciate that. I mean, we can't tell you how delighted we are to have host you, and hopefully it's been a source of enrichment and distraction as well. So thank you again, and thank you, Tsedal and Bhargav. It's been terrific to host you. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.